He spent months waiting for a life-saving surgery, hoping his parents would come through. But when the day came, his world shattered. Instead of getting help, he discovered something that would change everything. A secret so vile it would set the stage for the most painful revenge of his life. Jacob's mind felt like it was drowning in a whirlpool. But all he could hear was the thundering echo of his parents' rejection. He had always been their good son, the one who made them proud, never asking for much. But now, when he needed them most, it felt like he was nothing but an afterthought, a burden they didn't want to carry. The ache in his chest wasn't just from his failing heart, it was a profound pain that reached deep into the core of his existence. His parents, the ones who had raised him, nurtured him, and shaped his world, had turned their backs on him. The realization hit him like a tidal wave, a wave that crashed through every illusion of safety and trust he had ever known. When Jacob had first asked them for help, he never imagined their response would be so callous. Maybe you can get a loan or find another way. How could she say that to him? Didn't they know what this surgery meant? Didn't they understand that without it, he would die? But no, instead of offering comfort, compassion, or even the smallest gesture of hope, they had turned away. The world felt heavy and dark as Jacob sat there, staring at the ceiling of his room. He had been clutching onto the hope that his parents would be there for him, that their love would be enough to overcome the coldness of money. But now that hope was shattered. Every thought of their lavish vacations, their beautiful home, their shiny cars, all of it twisted into something ugly, something selfish. His mind replayed memories from his childhood, moments when he had believed that his parents would always be there, no matter what. The bedtime stories, the birthday celebrations, the family vacations, they seemed so far away now, like a dream that had slipped out of his grasp. He remembered his mother's comforting embrace when he was sick, how she used to make everything feel better with just a touch. His father's proud smile when he graduated high school, his assurances that no matter what, they would always support him. Those moments felt like lies now. But it wasn't just the past that hurt, it was the present. The present where he had asked for help, where he had exposed himself, vulnerable and desperate, hoping they would care. How could they do this to him? How could they choose their vacations over his life? It wasn't just disappointment, it was something darker. Something that simmered beneath the surface, waiting to break free. The more he thought about their response, the more his pain twisted into resentment. They had the money. They had the means. They just didn't care enough. And that stung in a way he couldn't explain. He tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on something else. He spent hours lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to shut out the voices in his head. But no matter what he did, the same question kept repeating. Why? Why had they refused him? Why hadn't they helped him when he needed it most? Then, one evening, everything changed. Trying to distract himself from the growing knot of anxiety in his stomach, he came across one of his mother's social media posts, a picture of her and his father on some pristine beach, the sun setting behind them. For a moment, the image seemed to blur before his eyes. The turquoise waters, the white sand, the smiles on their faces, it all felt so distant, so foreign. His parents, the ones who had just told him they couldn't afford his surgery, were now flaunting their wealth for the world to see. The betrayal hit him like a punch to the gut. His chest tightened, and for a moment, it felt like he couldn't breathe. $2 million. That was what they had spent on a single vacation. That was more than enough to pay for his surgery. That was more than enough to save his life, and yet they had refused. They had chosen to waste their money on indulgence, on fleeting pleasures, while he was left to fight for his survival. His mind raced, emotions swirling like a storm. He wanted to scream. He wanted to throw his phone across the room, to tear the image apart. But he didn't. Instead, he sat there numb, unable to look away. The more he stared at the picture, the more he realized that this wasn't just about money. This was about something deeper. Something much darker. They had chosen their own luxury over his life. And that thought gnawed at him like a relentless hunger, something he couldn't shake. As the days passed, the anger continued to grow, festering inside him. He couldn't understand how they could do this to him. Didn't they care about him? How many times had they told him he was their priority, that nothing mattered more than family? How many times had they promised they would always be there for him, no matter what? But now, all of it felt like a joke. The betrayal was sharp, cutting deep into his soul. Every time he thought about it, he felt like he was suffocating. His chest ached, not just from the physical pain of his heart condition, but from the emotional toll this betrayal had taken on him. He had trusted them. He had believed them. But now that trust was gone. Jacob didn't know what to do with himself. He couldn't go back to his parents, not after this. But he also couldn't just let it slide. He couldn't ignore the way they had treated him, the way they had turned their backs on him when he needed them most. But what could he do? He had no power, no resources. He was weak, sick, and alone. His only option was to wait for the inevitable wait until his heart gave out, until there was nothing left. But as he sat there, consumed by the pain, something began to shift within him. A spark of determination, a flicker of something more than just anger. It was a cold, calculating feeling, one that whispered of revenge. Jacob had always been the good son. He had followed the rules, done everything right, and yet it had never been enough. His parents had shown him who they truly were, and now he was going to show them who he could become. The plan was vague at first, a fleeting thought that danced at the edges of his mind. But as time passed, it began to take shape. He would make them regret their actions. He would make them feel the weight of their betrayal, the consequences of choosing their luxury over his life. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Jacob didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would make them pay. The tension in Jacob's heart was palpable. He had been pushed to his breaking point, and now he was ready to take matters into his own hands. But as the plan took shape, there was one thing Jacob couldn't shake, a deep, knowing regret. Even though his mind was set, even though he had decided on his path, the weight of his decision hung over him like a shadow. He would get his revenge, yes, but the price would be high. Jacob's mind was a storm. Each thought collided with the next, forming a whirlwind of confusion, rage, and sorrow. How had things gone this far? The cold rejection from his parents, the realization that their promises of love had always been empty, gnawed at him. He had been so sure that no matter what happened, they would come through for him. But now that foundation of trust lay in ruins. The more he thought about it, the more the world felt like it was crumbling beneath him. He closed his eyes, his heart beating erratically in his chest, not just from the physical pain of his failing heart, but from the anguish that threatened to drown him. Every memory, every moment of happiness seemed tainted now. He couldn't shake the images of their faces, his mother's kind eyes when she used to tuck him in at night, his father's strong hands lifting him onto his shoulders as a child, the times they told him he was their world. Where had that love gone? A surge of disbelief washed over him. How could they, the people who had always promised they would be there for him, turn their backs when he needed them most? The thought of it, their coldness, their excuses, the way they had dismissed him as if his life wasn't worth saving, made him feel like he was suffocating. It was too much. He wanted to scream, to lash out, but all he could do was sit there in silence, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on him. The deep sense of hopelessness that filled him now was nothing compared to the desperation he'd felt when he first found out about his heart condition. Back then, there had been a flicker of hope, a belief that if he just held on, things would work out. He'd been sure that his parents, who had given him so much over the years, would help him get the surgery he so desperately needed. But now, as the days dragged on and his health deteriorated, that hope seemed more and more like a cruel joke. The images of their vacation had been the catalyst. Jacob couldn't escape the thought of them lounging on the beach, their smiles so carefree while he was trapped in a nightmare of uncertainty. How had they been so blind? How had they let their own indulgences blind them to his suffering? $2 million. Money that could have saved him. But instead, it was spent on a lavish escape from reality, a world they inhabited while he was left to drown in his own pain. Jacob's hands trembled as he clenched them into fists, his nails digging into his palms. The rage that had begun as a flicker now burned bright. He had trusted them. believed in their love. But now that trust felt like a lie. It felt as if everything he had ever known had been a facade, a carefully crafted illusion to make him believe that they cared. The truth was too ugly to face, too painful to accept. The love he had once believed in was nothing more than a tool to manipulate him, a way to keep him in line while they lived their comfortable, self-serving lives. His thoughts drifted back to the moments when everything had seemed so perfect. He remembered the times when they would take him on family outings, picnics in the park, trips to the zoo. The way his father would laugh with him, teaching him how to ride a bike, how to swim. His mother's comforting voice when he was sick, the gentle caress of her hand on his forehead. He had believed that nothing could ever break the bond they shared, that no matter what happened, they would always be there for him. But now those memories felt like a cruel joke. Each happy moment was overshadowed by the stark reality of the present. How could they have so easily turned away from him? How could they have betrayed him so completely, so coldly? The more Jacob thought about it, the more his world began to unravel. The love he had once felt for them now felt like a trap, a prison that had kept him confined in a delusion. The truth was, they had never truly cared. They had cared for themselves, for their own comfort, and he'd been nothing more than an afterthought. Tears burned at the back of Jacob's eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him broken. Instead, the pain morphed into something else, something darker, more dangerous. It wasn't just sorrow anymore. It was rage. It was a burning need for justice, for retribution. He had been wronged, and it was time for them to feel the weight of their betrayal. The seed of revenge had been planted when he saw their vacation photos, but it hadn't fully taken root until now. As he sat there in the dark silence of his room, Jacob realized that he couldn't just let this slide. He couldn't go on pretending that everything was fine. He had to make them pay. Not just for the pain they had caused him, but for the life they had taken from him. He had sacrificed everything for them. His trust, his love, his belief in family, and they had thrown it all away. But how? How could he get back at them for what they had done? Jacob knew he didn't have the power to destroy their world, at least not directly. But he didn't need to. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. He didn't need to destroy their lives. He spent the next few days obsessing over the idea. The more he thought about it, the clearer the plan became. Jacob knew he had the means to exact his revenge. He had always been good with technology, a skill he had learned on his own, and a skill that would serve him now. He had already seen the cracks in their perfect lives, the lies they had woven to make themselves appear flawless. Now it was time to expose them for who they really were. Jacob knew he had to start small. He couldn't just jump in head first. But the more he thought about it, the more the plan took shape. It would start with the vacation receipts. That would be the first step, the first crack in the facade. He would expose their hypocrisy, their greed, and their indifference to his suffering. He would show the world that they had chosen luxury over life. But even as the plan took form, Jacob felt a twinge of guilt. It wasn't that he didn't want to do it. He had suffered too much to let them get away with this. It was hard to shake the feeling that, by taking this path, he was severing the last thread of hope he had ever had for them. He had always been a good son. He had always done what was expected of him, been the person they wanted him to be. But now, he realized that he couldn't keep playing that role. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, that their love was enough. It wasn't. Jacob took a deep breath, his eyes burning with the weight of his decision. There was no going back now. The anger, the betrayal, the pain, they had all led him to this moment. His parents had made their choice, and now he would make his. As he sat in the quiet of his room, the weight of his decision settling over him, Jacob finally realized something. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming his life, about taking back the power that had been stripped from him. It was about showing them and the world that he was more than just a pawn in their game. He was someone who could fight back. And he would. The plan was already taking shape in his mind, but there was one thing Jacob knew for sure. He wouldn't just make them regret their actions. He would make them feel the full extent of the pain they had caused him. And in doing so, he would find the closure he so desperately needed. The moment of reflection was brief. The determination that followed, however, was unwavering. He would make them pay. And no matter what it cost him, he would finally take control of his fate.